Whereas today, you have all these, Catholic apologists on the internet going around and challenging people to debates using the tactics of provocateurs and influencers, TikTokers basically, in order to have a gotcha moment and find a clip that makes someone look silly, and they call themselves an apologist. It's a bastardization of it. It's professional wrestling is what it is. It's not real. There are very few Catholic so-called apologists out there that will engage, especially with traditionalists. If they read something at 1 Peter 5 that they don't agree with, they are not going to write a letter to the editor. They're not going to write their own 10-page reply. They are just going to jump right to their computer and they are going to just start blasting them, basically calling them names, labeling them as schismatics or whatever, totally ruin any chance at doing something that's actually healthy. And these are the same people who have the audacity to label others schismatics, which means to divide, and fundamentalists, meaning that they're basically heretics. And these people are acting in ways that are anathema to Catholic morality, and it's sickening and it needs to stop. I don't know how they do it and not get called out by their own parish priest. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to be talking about the downfall of Catholic apologetics. Now, before I continue, I need to make a few things clear. I've intentionally decided that I'm not going to be talking about particular persons in this conversation for a couple of reasons. One, I personally can't stand the propensity of so many online Catholics and just online people in general who are involved in any sort of commentary to constantly be making videos about others, expecting a response or a reaction. I find it childish, infantile. To be honest, it has the same kind of air to it that, it's like tabloid stuff, and I think it's just despicable and immature. Secondly, I quite frankly want to try to be nice. People don't like being embarrassed. I don't talk into this microphone just to hear myself talk, although some people probably think I do. But I don't do that. If I'm going to say something, it's my opinion that perhaps it might be helpful for someone to hear it. Maybe you think I'm wrong. That's what I think. So there you go. Disagree with me if you'd like. So if I make a video about, I don't know, Johnny Smith's apologetics. There's no Johnny Smith apologist, by the way, that I know of. Johnny Smith's apologetics and how he's such a moron. What is the likelihood that Johnny Smith is going to listen to it? Very little. And if I think that it'd be good for him to listen to it, then I probably shouldn't make fun of him. Okay. And also, you can't talk about just on a practical scale. You just can't mention the individuals involved in Catholic apologetics today without expecting, endless live streams. And I'm not just talking about the usual suspects. There's a lot of relatively unknown, especially in the based groiper sort of crowd. If you don't know what that is, don't waste your time. I know there are many cool groipers out there. I'm just saying, you know what I'm talking about. These guys that go after trads all the time, defend Vatican II, and then endlessly talk about Jewish conspiracies, not realizing the disconnect. By the way, the groiper guys out there who have the whole handle on the whole Jewish question thing, who are constantly defending Vatican II and so forth and whatever, you honestly seem like a psyop. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. If I was going to put on my conspiracy theorist hat, I would think to myself, what would be a great way to neutralize this crop of young men that are becoming noticers about the things going on with the quote unquote JQ? I would say, you know what? Get them to realize, the wizard behind the curtain, and then neutralize them by getting them to defend Nostra Aetate, Vatican II, and going to the new mass. You're completely neutered. You're ineffectual, not realizing that you yourself are contributing to your own downfall by doing apologetics for the new springtime, which completely neutralizes any attempt to stop the Judaization of the church. So, because it's inherent to the new springtime, especially in the pontificate of John Paul II and the messianism inherent to his pontificate. My apologies for the brief interruption here, but I'd like to draw your attention to the annual St. Joseph's Sportsman Dinner, which is taking place in just 2 weeks, November 2nd. And it is taking place in Marine City, Michigan. So all Michiganders, or those who are relatively near to there, who are on the Canadian side of the border, it's taking place. I've been to this event before. It's great. Some good friends of mine are putting this on for St. Joseph's Academy, which provides affordable classical Christian education to K-8 students and has been doing so for more than 30 years. And if you are a sportsman, there are a lot of prizes to win in order to win stuff that will help you with hunting. I actually don't know if on YouTube we're allowed to talk about those things that go bang that you're allowed to use for hunting. I don't even know, actually. I just don't want to get this video taken down. 50-50 raffles, table drawings, split the deck raffle. There's a live auction, and there is a way to actually buy a ticket for a raffle for one of those things you use for hunting. And you don't have to actually go to the event. So you can find the information on that on the website that I'm showing you right now. And the link for it is in the description to this podcast. If you sign up for a ticket, you get 10 free red raffle tickets if you use the link that I've put underneath here. And the same applies for if you buy a table as well. And you can do things like buy the table. You can get a dinner super bundle. All these things come with benefits. But the most important thing is that it goes to this wonderful event. And I will be there as well with some friends of mine, going to cross the border and come down for a rockin' good time with all these trads and trying to support education and promote the excellentness and funness of sportsmen's activities. So check the link for that in the description to this podcast. All the information is there. And now back to the show. In any event, you can't talk about any of these apologists without having a ton of different replies from all over the whatever that you never asked for. And, you calls for debates and whatever. And it's just annoying. It's like professional wrestling. When you go to the gym, for example, or you go shoot hoops or whatever you do for, let's say, for sport, or if you're a musician, I don't know, you go to an open mic night and you just want to, play your favorite folk tunes and sing for people because they give you free pints if you do that. And it's a nice way to spend your Friday evening. You're not inviting people to challenge you to a guitar off. You just want to share something that is meaningful to you. If you go to the gym and you shoot hoops, it is not clear that you are putting an open challenge to everybody in the gym to play one-on-one. You just want to do that because you think it's fun. If you go to the gym and you do your deadlifts or your bench press, you're not inviting people to say, come be in my strength competition with me or whatever. You're just working out. If you're engaging in sharing your thoughts with people on the internet, you're not necessarily asking to have debates with people. If you want to have debates with people, just have debates with people. You don't have to, it's not like this unwritten rule that anybody who says something must necessarily be involved in some sort of endless response and reaction. It's just insane. I'll talk about this more as we go. But that's the main reason I'm not naming people. It's very practical and hopefully charitable. And that's why. Okay. Now, first thing we have to ask ourselves, if we're talking about Catholic apologetics, what is Catholic apologetics? Well, and I have notes here to make sure I don't get too much off topic, which I've already done 3 or 4 times. What is apologetics? Well, apologetics is what it sounds like. It's not making apologies, but the reason why we use the word apology is it's an explaining yourself. When you apologize to somebody, you say you're sorry, and then if you do it well, you'll explain kind of your mentality at the time so the person can understand where you're coming from, which can make it more understandable and maybe lessen the blow without explaining it away, obviously, but in context. Apologetics is explaining to people the Catholic faith, and that's what it is. It can take many different forms. It can be in the sense of sort of pure doctrinal presentations. It can be historical. You're going to do apologetics for the church's history against lies, black legends and things. It could be philosophical. You could be a Catholic apologist who specializes in philosophy in order to explain the underpinnings of the metaphysical necessity to understand the faith that has always been understood, something like that, and other types of things. We could say in a related sense, you have something that's a little bit maybe different, and we would say maybe evangelization, and perhaps apologetics is under the under the umbrella of evangelization. But if we get wider out, you get into things like filmmaking and music making and art and whatever. And those are kind of like apologetics in the sense that they're presenting the faith, but they're more broad and they're more in the evangelization setting. You can also have apologetics that's in the way of literature. You could make fiction. And yes, it's a fiction, but it presents the Catholic faith in a good light, in a way that is persuasive to people and meaningful to hopefully prompt them to consider the faith if they haven't. And ultimately, what is the goal of all of this stuff? The goal of all of this is for the salvation of souls. And that's the important part. Fulton Sheen had an expression. My friend Al Smith, if he's listening, he'll know what I'm saying. Unless souls are saved, nothing is saved. Okay? So the point of apologetics ultimately can't be the apologetics itself. It must be the salvation of souls. So let's use an example here. That's completely absurd, but just to demonstrate the point. If apologetics is explaining the faith in a sequential format so that people understand it, whatever realm we're talking about, whatever medium. Well, although technically speaking, if you were to coerce a bunch of people to sit in a room and tape their eyes open and make them watch a documentary on why the Catholic faith is true, you would be, in a sense, engaging in apologetics, but obviously the salvation of that person's soul is probably not at the forefront, considering of how poorly you're treating them. And that would be a bad way of doing apologetics. Apologetics is not commentary. That's an important thing in the basic sense. Of course, there is a need in general for people to engage in the culture, in commentary for Catholicism. But apologetics, meaning just explaining the faith, is not the same thing as being a Daily Wire host and talking about the culture. That's fine. I'm not saying the Daily Wire is all good because they've got problems, but that's fine. I mean, if you are a Catholic who wants to talk about, novels, and you do it from a Catholic perspective, you of course are kind of pitching the faith in a sense, but you're doing commentary primarily. And the apologetical thing is kind of secondary. It's important to keep these things sort of separate, or it's important to have distinctions and lines about what you're doing, because what we're seeing right now in apologetics is that these lines are getting blurred, and many of these apologists who have been very famous over the years and have done great work in many cases have now become just basically talking heads, talking about whatever they want, which I don't have a problem with because I kind of do that. But basically saying this is apologetics and using their organization or their name or the reputation as an apologist to be like, Catholics must believe this. And it has to do with things like, historical narratives or ancillary issues, like, just basically things in the pop culture or political things. And that's not really fair. You're getting outside of the realm of just explaining the Catholic faith as such to trying to sort of make Catholics believe that believing things that have nothing to do with the salvation of souls has to do with Catholic dogma when it doesn't. And that's a problem. So how has Catholic apologetics been done in the past? Well, if we look back to the earliest parts of the church, obviously it was done in two ways. It was done through rhetoric, which was the most common. That's preaching, etc., presenting things as an orator to an assembly or something. St. Paul and others talk about this in the New Testament. We have evidence of these sorts of things. Peter obviously preaches at Pentecost. Christ demonstrates this by having his rhetorical debates with the Pharisees and others. And then written word. St. Paul's letters are apologetical letters. He's explaining the Old Testament typology in many cases to his congregations. Okay. Because that's something we should probably address as well, is that apologetics is not just explaining to non-believers, it's also explaining the faith to Catholics who have questions. And that's what he basically is doing in those letters. You'll see him bring out the Old Testament typology and so forth to show the fulfillment of the various things, accomplished in the person of Jesus Christ and his actions and so forth. So that's important. Apologetics is not entertainment. It doesn't mean apologetics isn't entertaining at times, but it can't primarily be entertainment. And historically, as we progress through the various eras, we get to the time of basically the printing press, because you got to remember, before the printing press, oral speaking abilities were the most primary means of communicating a message. Yes, there was writing, but it was difficult to share around books and things like that because they were so costly because of the fact that they were so rare, which is, again, one of the, if we do a little apologetics here about history, one of the things Protestants will say is, Catholics were hiding the Bible from people, and they'll tell stories about, for example, in the university of some seminary or the library of some university seminary or something like that, the Bible was chained down to the desk. And it was in some cases, because if you did, if you did the metrics of what that would cost in today's dollars, that Bible was like $40,000 because it was multiple volumes done by hand with artwork and, had to be kept in a certain way. Protestants often fail to explain that at the time of the Protestant Revolution, this was also the revolution in the printing press, which meant that you could then produce various translations of things and pamphlets and manuscripts in ways that were fast, which you couldn't do before, and had nothing to do with the intentions of Catholics. It had to do with technological realities. So really, for the first 1,000 or more years of the church, you have it mainly in the way of rhetoric, explaining things. And that's how everyone was. You look to just the way that things were communicated. In the city I grew up in, London, Ontario, obviously it's not London, England, but we have some Londonish things as part of our history, and we kind of hold on to those things as kind of general customs. And for the longest time, we had the town crier, and he was just an individual who would just be hired by the city or businesses to do the whole town crier thing. But back in the day, if you wanted something to be sent around the city or the village or the town, you would have the town crier go through memorizing a message, and he would explain this to the people about what was going on. It's kind of like you get a text on your phone from the government telling you to get vaccinated. Back in the day, if they had such idiocy, they would have the town crier go around and tell you to get vaccinated. Then eventually the printing press comes along, and especially if you look at, for example, in the life of St. Edmund Campion, who is a saint that I have a great devotion to, and I recommend everyone reads his biography by Evelyn Waugh. You see him engaging in apologetics for the Catholic faith in England after the Reformation, after the revolution of King Henry VIII, and he was during the Elizabethan period. And you see him using the printing press to share basically booklets around the country, debunking the Anglican talking points to explain the Catholic faith, doing apologetics in that very clear sense with the written word. And of course, it's progressed from there. And for the longest time, before the advent of mass communication, apologetics was largely a written thing. Now, it is my opinion that written apologetics is the most effective. And I'll explain why as we go. Today, apologetics, of course, has taken on the characteristics of mass media. And there are good ways to do this. St. Maximilian Kolbe famously used radio technology in order to transmit the Catholic faith. But there's an expression. There's an expression that we need to remember. It's that expression from Marshall McLuhan where he says the medium is the message. There's a lot of truth in there. And by the way, Marshall McLuhan was a faithful Catholic. I think he was a professor at the University of Toronto. And he died in the 70s or 80s. And there were stories of people, they see him at daily mass praying his rosary and things. Anyway, he said the medium is the message. What did he mean by that? Well, the way that you present information, the medium you're using, really does make it that the message will be a certain way. That's very true. I mean, it's one of those truisms. It's sort of a platitude. So it's not the deepest, profound philosophical explanation for something, but there's a lot of truth in it. So for example, here, I'm doing a video podcast. You might be listening to it on audio, but this is a podcast. There are certain things I can do when I'm speaking like this, and then there are certain things I can't do. This isn't a motion picture. I can't use the visual things in order to do it. This isn't an audiobook. I'm not reading you an essay. This is a sort of loosely organized, off-the-cuff expression that is very common in our day. It has certain benefits and it has certain limitations. Also, you're likely listening to this on YouTube or another podcast platform, perhaps Substack. By the way, this is available for the public, but If you do want more in-depth things about books and studies and things like that, I do do that on my Substack. If you'd like to join up, you can find the link for that underneath. And just the fact that it's on YouTube does a lot for the message, because you have to use the platform. And you have to use the platform, which has a certain way of operating. And we know that people have short attention spans and they click shiny things. You know, they're like turkeys. You ever hear of how, and maybe it might just be one of those apocryphal stories about how they raise turkeys, but I've heard it, and maybe it's true, that basically the way many of them are bred, they're so dumb that they won't eat unless there's something shiny in the food. So they put these pennies, shiny pennies and things like that. And their aim is so bad that they don't actually eat the pennies. And they go after the shiny thing and they bob their heads and they eat the food. People are like that when it comes to entertainment. You know, they're scrolling through their YouTube or their Facebook or whatever, and they see a shiny thumbnail that has a funny image to it, and they click on it. And if they don't like it in the first 30 seconds, they turn it off. They're a lot like turkeys going after shiny pennies in that way. So if you're someone who wants to be famous, which is a point we should probably talk about at some point in this conversation as well. If you're someone who wants to reach more people on YouTube, because reaching people is a good thing if you have something good to say, if you desire the salvation of their soul, otherwise it's not worth talking about anything. If you want to do that, well, now you have a temptation. And you have a temptation to become relevant in order to stay relevant in the algorithm and the whatever. So what are you going to do? You're probably going to make some clickbaity titles. You're probably going to make some attractive thumbnails. You might even start with some crazy salacious statement at the beginning, and the rest of the video doesn't have much to do with it, but people kind of keep listening because they are waiting to see if something's going to have to do with it. You'll likely use other people's names. That's one thing that many apologists are doing nowadays, is they're using other people's names because it gets more traffic. You know, people love to go after Taylor Marshall. Many apologists love to go after Taylor Marshall. They love to put his name in the title because they know that he has the biggest account of all Catholics, individuals at least. I don't know if there's any organizations with more subscribers, but he's like 1 million too on YouTube alone. Not to mention his Twitter and his Facebook, I think, plus his other numbers on iTunes and Spotify. He's approaching somewhere probably around 2 million listeners, at least potential listeners, just by subscribers alone. And if you put Taylor Marshall's name in your title, you might get a few thousand hits that are just looking up Taylor Marshall, and they'll come across your thing. And it's very dishonest. It's very clickbaity. All those temptations are there. And that medium is going to become your message. So apologetics in the Catholic world has gone largely, in many cases, from, let's say, the good old days. And I said I would only talk about things, I wouldn't talk about things negatively, but I will talk about something positively. You know, back when I was reverting to the Catholic faith, Catholic Answers had a lot of, obviously, call-in radio shows and things like that, as they still do. And that was their main shtick, and they did very good stuff. Now, I have many disagreements with certain things Catholic Answers professes. I don't like the fact that they're called Catholic Answers, if I'm being honest, because it really is a lay organization, and they give the impression that they're speaking on behalf of the Catholic Church and giving you the answer. I understand they probably have diocesan approval for that name and things like that, but to me, that doesn't mean much in this day of modernist crisis, because, you know, a lot of things have diocesan approval and username Catholic anyway. But in any event, they did a lot of good. And whether or not they still hold fast to that way of operating, and you think they do, that's your opinion to make. I said I wouldn't speak about individuals privately or negatively. But in any event, as Catholic apologetics has grown, you know, we've gone beyond the Lighthouse Catholic Media CDs and all those sorts of things. We've gone beyond the radio replies and these kind of very basic things that were just very meat and potatoes Catholicism. Now it's become the point where in the world today of this sort of online communication, there is this temptation to become a celebrity. And let's be honest, everybody can fall into this temptation. I recognize the temptation in myself, which is why I don't know if you've noticed, but I've actually changed the way that I've been doing things on my podcast for about the last year. I kind of fell into this whole thing I wasn't sure. Was I an apologist? What was I? I didn't know what I was. I just knew that I wanted to talk about the Catholic faith, and I had reasons why I had to make a career switch. So I had to sort of try to figure things out. Primarily, I'm an author, but I enjoy the whole podcasting side of it as well. And I thought, what should I do with that? Eventually, I realized I don't want to be any apologist in the strict sense. I don't want to be someone who has to stay relevant and continually find ways to be more clickbaity. I don't want that. And ultimately, because as I talked about at the outset of this show, Catholic apologetics or commentary in any sense really needs to be done with the salvation of souls as the ultimate goal. And that should include your own soul. So if you're going to be wasting your time and engaging in slander and all these kinds of things about other Catholics, especially lay Catholics, it's one thing, again, I said there has to be a line made between there has to be a line between what is apologetics and what is commentary, and there can be a little overlap, but they're different things. I have no problem with Catholic commentary, news, etc. I mean, people talking about the synod or the crazy actions of Pope Francis. I think that's helpful. But it's a very strange thing to watch many of these apologists who have made their living explaining the Catholic faith, basically in a self-professed way with no authority, by the way. None of these men have any authority at all to tell you anything at all, and neither do I. So don't listen to me if you don't want to. But they have no authority at all to start labeling other Catholics as certain types of people as if it's a matter of dogma. I mean, it's a one thing if there's some sort of professed heresy, if we're talking about modernism or some other ism, Lutheranism, whatever, there's some heresy, and you find some Catholic commentator or apologist or priest or even the Pope saying something that's against the faith in the sense that it's against the dogmas of the faith. Well, that's a very clear cut and dry sort of thing, and you're kind of just transmitting the wisdom of the defiant teachings of the church, which is just helpful to people. It's another thing if you use your platform as an apologist, people look to as a trustworthy person, excuse me, to start making up things, whatever. There's a lot of people are calling traditional Catholics now fundamentalists. There's no Catholic doctrine or, there's no dogmatic treatise or anything on any of that. It's a complete opinion, but they're doing it under the name of I'm a Catholic apologist. It's very, very disingenuous. So this temptation is there. And over the years, we've seen many of these Catholic apologists who, at the beginning of their careers, did really great work. And they've basically morphed into social media influencers and people who want to have their own version of the Catholic Joe Rogan show or something like that. And it's very sad. And the reason is, well, one of the reasons why this is so sad is because apologetics is an art. Persuading people to believe the Catholic faith can't be done effectively in a 20-minute YouTube video. There are going to be exceptions to this. You never know. Someone may at that moment, and in that moment, that 15-minute clip was exactly what they needed to hear for something that was a stumbling block, and fine. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. What I'm saying is, though, given that the medium of social media, podcasting, and so forth is very much in competition with this world of, turkey feeding attention spans, the attention span of a squirrel, it's very rare to see any of these apologists presenting strong and thoughtful and well thought out arguments that are meaningful and often that are charitable for the Catholic faith. And yes, there are huge numbers on some of these channels, and that's great. There are huge numbers, but that does not equate to quality. McDonald's serves a lot more people than the 5-star Michelin restaurant, but they're not the same thing. Many people sign up for Planet Fitness because it's $10 a month and you get a pizza or whatever they do. But the sort of pound for pound, literally, percentage of people who are actually strong and fit that work out at Planet Fitness is way lower than at some, legitimate place of exercise and fitness training people seriously. I could go on with analogies. But this is a temptation that I think that many of these people have fallen into. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult for anyone to avoid these things unless they intentionally make decisions to do so. And, this is why the scriptures tell us, for example, that, the love of money is the root of all evil, and you can't serve two masters. You can't serve God and mammon. You can't serve the money and the Lord. It's just not going to happen. No one can do it. People continually try to do it, and you can't do it. Of course, you might become very wealthy. I mean, you could write a book tomorrow on, why Catholicism is true, and it's 100 pages long, and for some reason you sell 1 million copies and you get $2 a copy because the publisher gives you, 10% royalties of a $20 book. You'll be rich. That's not the point. You obviously can happen. But when the pursuit itself is for relevance and for influence, you're going to start sinning. And perhaps this is a good point, because one of the things, or a good transition to something else here, because what is obvious in modern Catholic apologetics and how it's become is that it's reflective of the crisis in the church in the educational and doctrinal and dogmatic sense. Pius X was warning about this 120 years ago, roughly. It was 1907 when Pascendi came out, but the 1800s and the early 1900s was a time where popes were warning about all these errors, especially in philosophy. I mean, Pope Leo XIII basically wrote basically excoriated Immanuel Kant's philosophy in one of his encyclicals. I can't remember, in the late 1800s. Excuse me. But the point being, there is a real lack of true philosophical training in Catholic apology and in Catholic education in general today. And one of the ways you can understand when someone has a real lack of sound Catholic philosophy is in the way that they act, whether it's virtuous or vicious. Here's what I mean by that. The differences between a virtuous action and a vicious action are so slight in some cases. Take, for example, what Thomas Aquinas says about the virtue of prudence. So he talks about prudence, and this is in the Summa, etc., but I'm not going to bring it up here, but I've read it a million times and I can explain it, I think. When he talks about, prudence essentially is, the sort of marks of prudence is that you have to assess the situation. You have to appeal to the experience you have. You have to appeal to the wisdom of others. You have to try to appeal to history. You have to take things into prayer. And you have to essentially take enough time that you can be sure that you're not acting emotionally. But at the same time, when you pray for a sign and the sign manifests itself through certain secondary causes that are clear, given the fact that you're trying to understand this thing, then at that point you do need to act. But at the same time, none of the things that you do can be wrong. You can't say, well, if I do this, I'll get the end I want. And the end you want might be good, but if you have to do something that's immoral to get it, that's not permissible. And really, the sort of one of the let's say, what's the word I'm looking for here? Not opposites, but one of the perversions of prudence is what is the vice of craftiness, or you might even use the word guile. It's very similar. And in the sense of craftiness, it looks a lot like prudence, and you won't even be able to recognize it unless you really investigate. And we see this, this is where basically consequential decisions come into play, where, well, I have a desired end. The desired end is good, and I'm not really certain whether this thing is moral or not, but I'll do it anyway because I'll get the end, which is good, which will help the most people. And people can convince themselves that they're being prudent because they're thinking about the needs of others or something like that, when really they're doing something that's immoral, and it's going to come back to bite them later on, and it always does. What we see right now in a Catholic apologetics with these major Catholic influencers is a type of craftiness where it has the appearance of good. So-and-so's calling out Protestants. So-and-so is, debunking this or that. But how are they doing it? Are they doing it in a virtuous way? Have they ever attempted to speak to the person? You're supposed to try to do that. Now, you're not absolutely required to. If someone does present something publicly and you have no real chance of ever talking to the person, because there's some famous person or something, okay, then you can sort of respond with kind. If the Prime Minister of Canada tomorrow comes out and says something ridiculous about Catholics, I know I can't talk to the Prime Minister, and it's public, so it can be responded to publicly. But if you have the opportunity to speak with somebody, you're supposed to try to talk to them. I mean, this is pretty basic in the scriptures. Have they tried to do that? They never do. I can tell you from my own personal life, I've been burned by various major mainstream Catholic apologists behind the scenes in trying to reach out to them to myself, and it just is a disaster. I've had people come after me online, and I've asked them to talk to me privately, and I've given them my email, even publicly, my work email, not my personal, but my work email that people contact me through my Substack and stuff. I've given them my email and posted it in their comments on videos about me saying, please, I'd love to talk to you about this, and never got a response. Are these people that are doing these things that are under the guise of apologetics, are they, they're not trying to understand the person. Are they even representing the person properly? And I understand this is an occupational hazard, but I've had plenty of videos made about me. There was one individual who did and it's not who you're thinking is, some other person, did a 3-hour live stream about a tweet that I wrote. And I'm like, what is wrong with these people? I mean, it's a tweet. It's like 240 characters. I don't think it was too long. I think it was in a reply. It wasn't even too long, to show the whole thing. I think it was the tweet length limit. That was the classic limit, 280 characters or whatever it is. And they did a 3-hour live stream, debunking my theology. And it's a tweet, For one, if I made any error in the tweet, tell me and I'll correct it. Or if I just didn't say the things that you thought I should say and then say that I'm an idiot for not saying those things, it's literally a tweet. Get a grip on yourself. And this is one of these people that's looked to as an apologist. And that's those sorts of things are, this is the misrepresentation of people. And it's very destructive. It is not going to contribute to the salvation of souls for many reasons. I remember doing a video with my friend Taylor Marshall, and we were talking about St. George and one of these apologists. And me and Taylor and I were talking about how we're creationists. We don't believe in evolution, and how we believe St. George is a true story. There might be apocryphal events, obviously, in the various details, but we don't have a problem believing in any of the aspects of these tales. Whatever. If you don't think that that's true, fine. One of these apologists, did a hit job on me and Taylor using our names without talking to us, saying that and the thumbnail was something like believing in medieval British dinosaurs. I remember seeing that going, what? I guess I don't even know what the person was talking. I never watched the video because I don't want to waste my time, but I'm thinking, you use our names and our pictures, and then you're telling the public, and again, this is social media. So people look at these thumbnails and stuff and they think they know what they're, they see that and they go, oh, I know what this is about. Giving the illusion that we believe in medieval British dinosaurs, and we think that's the story of St. George. I've narrated Taylor Marshall's works on St. George. They're called the Sword and Serpent Trilogy, and it's set in the 300s. So even if you were to want to make fun of Taylor for believing in dragons, you would have, if you were going to represent him properly, you would have to consult his work his fiction work, by the way, and it was set in the 300s. Yet for some reason, we were accused of believing and spreading the lie of medieval British dinosaurs through a podcast by a mainstream Catholic apologist. This is the kind of stuff that goes on. And this again comes down to this lack of philosophical and training in virtue ethics, really. Because I think to myself often, I don't know how so many of these individuals have their channels and have their videos and produce their videos. Some of them very highly produced, talk about some of the things they talk about. I don't know how they do it and not get called out by their own parish priest. I constantly am thinking about, if I say something on the internet and I showed my parish priest, what is he going to tell me? If I have to stand before my Lord when I die, am I going to be guilty of some sort of slander or misrepresentation or etc. because of what I have said on the internet? And of course, I could be. And there are certain things, if I'm being honest, certain videos in the past that I wish I didn't make. And I have actually confessed some of the things that I've made because I realized, well, I shouldn't have said that. And I was emotional or whatever. In fairness, I am Italian. And having a temper is natural to Italians, like having laments and lamentations is natural to an Irishman. It's not really something we can help. I'm kind of joking, but it's kind of true. But nonetheless, I think to myself, how are these men even getting away with this? I mean, how are some of these organizations that are propping up some of these major apologists now, who call themselves Catholic or they speak for the church in some way, how are they allowing their employees or the people they subcontract or whatever? I mean, they're paying them a significant amount of money to do this. And I know, because I know how much money there is in this stuff for the mainstream people, because I know what my money is as not a mainstream person, and it's fine. But I know that theirs is exponentially higher than mine because I know what they get paid at their conferences and all these kinds of things based on what I would charge for a speaking engagement. I know what the market will bear. Let's put it that way. They're putting a lot of dollars of advertising and things like that into these organizations. These organizations are putting a lot of money in these whatever. And how are these people getting away with it? I mean, how are these priests that are having conversations with them on their podcast and so forth okay with what these hosts are doing? It's astonishing to me. And it comes back to the fact that, honestly, there's such a disparity in the formation of these people. Yes, they've memorized various passages from the New Catechism and so forth, but they are not well versed in anything before Vatican II. And say what you will, you want to be a hermeneutic of continuity person, fine. But that continuity is the 60 years since the council with the 1900 years before. You're going to have an expertise in a lot of that 1900 years of stuff before you can even get to the point where you can claim there's a continuity between what you're saying from Vatican II and before, because you don't even know what was said before. I remember watching, there's many occasions, but I mean, on one occasion, one of these major apologists on one of these big shows was saying that St. Pius V created the Roman Rite. And he just said it publicly and none of the people at the organization corrected it or whatever. And it's like, how moronic do you have? I mean, you're a fraud if you say that. That's fraudulent. One of these other apologists was appearing on a podcast and he was explaining that he preferred the Byzantine Rite because it best responded to Sacrosanctum Concilium, which is the document from Vatican II on the Roman Rite. He liked the Byzantine liturgy because it best responded to Sacrosanctum Concilium for active participation. So he's probably never, I don't know if he's ever read Sacrosanctum Concilium. For one, the traditional Latin Mass actually, I mean, Sacrosanctum Concilium has some gray areas and ambiguities for sure. But if there's any liturgy in the Roman Rite that best responds to Sacrosanctum Concilium. It's the traditional Latin Mass, because that was the Mass in use while that document was written and was the liturgical concept. Also, it was written about the Roman Rite. It wasn't written about the Byzantine. There are other documents in Vatican II about the Eastern churches. So it's like, these are people who get paid a ton of money to work for organizations or do podcasts and things like that, where they will call themselves, they market themselves as Catholic in an official sense. And they don't even understand the things they're criticizing. These men constantly go after traditionalists. They don't even understand Vatican II. They don't even know what Vatican II talks about. And, I don't know how they get away with it. There must be so much interior discord and rot in these outlets and organizations and podcasts and whatever, that their apologists can be out there saying absolute falsehoods, going after other Catholics, like really engaging in sinful actions, purposefully misleading people about other people's beliefs and character in order to get 100,000 views on YouTube. It's very sad. And maybe if I kind of circle things back around here for a sec, there is a place for healthy Catholic debate. And that's something that's happened in the history of the church. Now, usually this will happen within the confines of a particular set of parameters, usually amongst academics. So if there's some sort of disputed theological question, back in the days of Aquinas, for example, the University of Paris, you'd have, these very specific debate confines about aspects of philosophy or theology with a moderator who was a master in the subject, and time for preparation and so forth, in a very civilized setting. And often it would happen in writing as well. You think back to the time of, for example, G.K. Chesterton, who in many ways engaged in apologetics, but it was very clear when Chesterton was doing apologetics. It was very clear when he was doing history. It was very clear when he was doing commentary. He had different quivers that he could pull. Different arrows in his quiver. Excuse me, wrong use of the word there. And when he would engage in written debates, this would be done in a way that no one could be misrepresented. I have a bunch of copies I don't have any around me right now, actually, but I got a bunch of old copies of this journal called the Chesterton Review. I haven't read any of the recent ones in the last few years, but there's a lot of great ones that I have. I got them at a sort of used Catholic bookshop. And I remember reading one, and the only author I remember in it was Joseph Pearce, who's very well known for his Chestertonian repertoire. Great Catholic scholar, wonderful Catholic scholar. But it was a debate between one person who had the sort of affirmative position, like, I believe X, Y, and Z, and this pertains to Chesterton. And then there were 4 responses to it, but they were all in essays, and they were all in the same publication. So I remember the topic was fascism. And, one person was saying he believed G.K. Chesterton either was a fascist or supported fascism or something like that. And it was his, 10 or 12 page essay. And then there were the 4 responses to it that were all in sequence in the same publication. That was so important because you read the whole thing of the man's thoughts at the beginning, lined up. You had the chance to do it properly. It was edited. They probably took 2 or 3 months to write their submissions, and they were looked at by editors and things. Then they would have handed that out to the other people who had time to digest it. It was probably a 6-month process, really. I think it's a quarterly or bi-yearly or semi-yearly publication. And then they had their time to write their responses. They were all put in the same publication, so then you could read it all, and there could be no opportunity for misrepresenting. There could be no opportunity for emotionalism. There could be no opportunity for inaccuracies. That is how Catholic debates are supposed to take place. Those are the safeguards that need to be put in place in order to make sure that we're doing things as Catholics, virtuously, intelligently, with circumspection and prudence and all of these virtues that are necessary. Whereas today, you have all these, Catholic apologists on the internet going around and challenging people to debates you know, using the tactics of provocateurs and influencers, TikTokers basically, in order to have a gotcha moment and find a clip that makes someone look silly, and they call themselves an apologist. It's a bastardization of it. It's professional wrestling is what it is. It's not real. And I could tell you, there are very few, if any, Catholic so-called apologists out there that will engage, especially with traditionalists, in that sort of very healthy way. If they read something at 1 Peter 5 that they don't agree with, they are not going to write a letter to the editor. They're not going to write their own 10-page reply and, or email the person and ask if they could have some clarifications or whatever. They are just going to jump right to their computer and they are going to just start blasting them, basically calling them names, labeling them as schismatics or whatever, and just totally ruin any chance at doing something that's actually healthy. And these are the same people who have the audacity to label others schismatics, which means to divide, and fundamentalists, meaning that they're basically heretics. And these people are acting in ways that are anathema to Catholic morality, and it's sickening and it needs to stop. Okay, I rambled a bit there, but I think I got my points. Ultimately, my friends, the thing that matters the most is the salvation of souls, and obviously you're just viewers. And if there are any Catholic apologists who watch this, please don't prove my point by going and making your ridiculous live streams based on snippets of a show or, associating people who have tried to have well thought out presentations of thought with, Ken Ham from the Creation Institute or something like that. Like, please don't, don't become a parody of yourself just to get more views on YouTube, because you're going to go to hell. You're going to lose your soul. You're going to sin gravely so you can be relevant on YouTube. And it's not going to bode well for you in the end. That's all, ladies and gentlemen. If you would like to see more of what I have to say, I don't know why you would, but if you would like to, you can check out my Substack. Link for that underneath. I do a lot of stuff there that's not here, including a book study on Dave on Crownton that I've been doing for months now at this point. 3 months, I guess. And it's going well, and I love it, and people are loving it. I just did a podcast with my wife that's available for members. Q&A about motherhood and all that kind of stuff. A lot of people like that. Excuse me. And everything else. So God bless you all. And we'll talk to you soon. This has been Mere Tradition. Bye-bye.